When you think of BYU, what comes to mind? Is it Lavelle Edwards, the revolutionary who turned Provo into a laboratory for the forward pass? Is it the quarterback factory, legends like Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Ty Detmer, and a long line of gunslingers who made BYU a national name? Or do you think of the Miracle Bowl and the countless other last-minute drives that BYU has in its long history? BYU has made a tradition of refusing to die when the game should already be over. In this video, we'll be going over the top 10 games that changed the national perception of BYU forever. Now, this isn't necessarily a list of BYU's best wins of all time. These are games where they didn't just win, but they redefined themselves and put their name on the map. Starting off with an honorable mention, BYU's win over Tennessee in 2019 was huge because it showed the nation that BYU could walk into an SEC stadium, take every punch, and still find a way to win when the moment got chaotic. Even though Tennessee ended up having a down year, that overtime comeback, especially the Micah Simon miracle catch, reminded people that BYU is still capable of producing national spotlight moments that cut through the noise and grab attention. Now down to the nitty-gritty. At number 10, BYU's win at Nebraska was one of those moments that instantly boosts the program's national perception and momentum, even beyond the final score. Walking into a packed Memorial Stadium, a place where Nebraska hadn't lost a season opener in decades, and stealing a win with a freshman quarterback on a last-second Hail Mary reminded the entire country that BYU still had the trademark big stage magic. It wasn't just that BYU won, it was how they won. The toughness, the poise, the chaos, the miracle finish. It all played perfectly on national TV and cut through the noise of the early season. The game also gave BYU a real momentum into the independence era. It showed recruits, analysts, and BYU fans BYU could still go toe-to-toe with a historic brand in a hostile environment and come out on top. Tanner Mangum's throw became an instant highlight reel staple, and the win re-energized the narrative around BYU. BYU's win at number 6 Wisconsin in 2018 was one of those rare moments where the entire college football world had to stop and recalibrate what it thought about the program. Walking into Camp Randall and punching a Big Ten team in the mouth was a statement that traveled far beyond Provo. National analysts had spent years wondering whether BYU could still line up and beat elite teams in the trenches. That afternoon answered the question with authority. It wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a trick play game, it was BYU out-toughing one of the toughest programs in America, and that instantly shifted the national conversation. What made the win even bigger for BYU's perception was the timing. The program had been fighting to prove it still belonged to the national spotlight and still had the physicality and identity that defied its best eras. BYU's win over 13th-ranked Kansas State was one of those games that instantly changed the tone around the program. For years, people wondered whether BYU could consistently compete with ranked Power 5 teams week after week, especially after joining the Big 12. Beating a top 15 Kansas State team, a program known for toughness, discipline, and physical line play, sent a clear message that BYU wasn't just happy to be here. They could line up against one of the conference's most respected teams and win. It wasn't a fluke. It was BYU proving they belonged in the Big 12 conversation. What really shifted national perception was how BYU won. They matched Kansas State's physicality, made big plays in key moments, and showed the depth and resilience people weren't sure they had yet in Power 5 level. After that game, the narrative changed from can BYU survive in the Big 12 to BYU is a real problem in this league. It boosted recruiting credibility, strengthened the program's national relevance, and reminded fans and analysts that BYU can still rise to the moment when the lights are brightest. BYU's demolition of Texas and Austin, with Taysom Hill running wild and dragging defenders for 4 quarters, was one of those games that instantly rewired how the college football world talked about BYU. Texas was still viewed as a blue blood with top-tier athletes, NFL bodies, and every structural advantage. For BYU to walk into their stadium and physically dominate them, not sneak out a win, but impose their will, forced national analysts to acknowledge that BYU wasn't just a quirky independent with a fun offense. They were a program that could out-tough and out-athlete a major brand on its own field. That performance put BYU back into highlight packages, national conversations, and Monday morning talk shows in a way they hadn't been in years. What really changed the perception was the style of the win. Taysom Hill didn't just beat Texas, he broke their defensive identity. His 259 rushing yards became a national talking point, and the image of him hurdling a Longhorn defender became a symbol of BYU's physical resurgence. BYU's win over Utah in 2021 was massive for the program's national perception because it ended a narrative that had hung over the program for more than a decade. Snapping the 9-game losing streak wasn't just a local rivalry moment. It signaled the rest of the country that BYU had finally rebuilt the physicality, depth, and consistency needed to beat a Power 5 opponent that had dominated them for years. It showed that Kalani Sitake's program wasn't just improving, it had crossed a threshold. The win also came at the perfect time for BYU's broader national image. With the Big 12 invitation fresh and the Cougars coming off a historic 2020 season, beating Utah validated that BYU's rise wasn't a one-year anomaly. It proved they can line up against a ranked, physical Pac-12 team and dictate the game. That performance reinforced BYU as a program trending upward, capable of competing in a Power 5 world, and worthy of the national respect they were starting to receive. It wasn't just a rivalry win, it was a statement that BYU was entering into a new era. BYU's opening game win over Texas A&M in 1996 immediately changed the national perception of the program because it shattered the idea that BYU couldn't physically or athletically match up with a major conference power. Texas A&M entered the season with a top 3 defense, a Big 12 pedigree, and a reputation for the overwhelming opponents with the wrecking crew. Instead, BYU, unranked and coming off a bowlless season, lit them up for 575 total yards and a staggering 536 passing yards from Steve Sarkisian, who threw 6 touchdowns and instantly launched himself into the Heisman conversations. National outlets described the game as a startling opener and a clear statement that BYU's offense was still elite and capable of dismantling a powerhouse defense on national TV. The win also reframed BYU's place in the broader college football landscape, and it wasn't just an upset, it was a showcase game in the Pigskin Classic, a nationally televised stage ABC had chosen specifically to highlight marquee MAT programs. BYU wasn't even supposed to be in the event months earlier, but the performance validated the network's gamble and put the entire university on display. BYU's win over third-ranked Oklahoma in 2009 was a seismic moment for the program's national perception because it instantly proved they could compete with and beat one of college football's true blue bloods on a national stage. BYU walked into the first ever game at Cowboys Stadium and outplayed a team loaded with NFL talent and led by the reigning Heisman Trophy winner Sam Bradford. National outlets immediately framed the upset as one of the biggest wins in school history, noting that BYU had snapped a 12-game losing streak to ranked non-conference opponents and vaulted them from number 20 to number 9 in the AP poll. Analysts emphasized that BYU went toe-to-toe with Oklahoma even before Bradford's injury, reinforcing that the Cougars' physicality and execution were legitimate, not circumstantial. The win also reshaped how people viewed BYU's ceiling. Suddenly, national championship talk, normally reserved for the sports elite, was being mentioned alongside BYU's name. Sounds crazy, but that's how big the win was at the time. The victory positioned the Cougars as a serious BCS buster threat and validated Bronco Mendenhall's push for national credibility. Both for BYU and the Mountain West Conference, Max Hall's clutch 16-play, 78-yard game-winning drive became a defining moment. BYU's 1997 Cotton Bowl victory over Kansas State was the moment analysts began treating BYU as more than a high-scoring outsider from a non-power conference. Kansas State entered the game ranked 14 with one of the nation's toughest defenses, and BYU's ability to beat them in a physical, grinded-out New Year's Day Bowl proved the Cougars could compete with elite programs on the biggest stages. The win also validated BYU's 14-1 season and helped cement the idea that their success wasn't just a product of a pass-heavy system. It was backed by real depth, coaching, and toughness. It elevated BYU's national credibility, influenced future rankings, and strengthens the program's reputation as a legitimate contender rather than a regional curiosity. BYU's Cotton Bowl win also carried symbolic weight. It showed the program outside the traditional power structure could crash the New Year's Day stage and beat a ranked Big 12 opponent in front of a national audience. Besides the outlier 1984 national championship, for years critics argued that BYU's success came from playing weaker schedules, but outlasting Kansas State in a tough defensive battle directly challenged that narrative. It became one of those moments people pointed to when saying BYU wasn't just a statistical outlier. They were a team capable of winning real, high-stakes games against elite competition. At number 2, BYU stuns number 1 Miami in 1990. Before that night, many people still saw BYU as a pass-happy program from a non-power conference that put up big numbers but wasn't built to beat the nation's most athletic, physically dominant teams. Miami was the defending national champion, loaded with NFL talent, and riding a 32-game regular season winning streak. When BYU outdueled them behind Ty Detmer's brilliance, it shattered the stereotype that BYU couldn't just compete with college football's elite. They were capable of beating the very best team in the country. The win also elevated BYU's national credibility in a way no previous victory had. Detmer became a household name overnight, eventually winning the Heisman, and BYU vaulted into the national title conversation that year early. More importantly, the game proved that BYU's system could thrive against top-tier speed and physicality, forcing critics to rethink long-held assumptions about the program. It became one of the defining moments in BYU history, the night the Cougars showed they could stand toe-to-toe with the dynasty and come out on top.
Along with Steve Young, we're at the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, and the BYU Cougars playing for the national championship. Here's the kickoff. Lee Johnson kicks it, and it lands in the end zone. It'll come back out to the 20-yard line. So it's BYU and Michigan. The Cougars the only undefeated team in the country.
Above all else, BYU's 1984 national championship, sealed by the Holiday Bowl win over Michigan, became one of the most important turning points in modern college football because it proved that a program outside the traditional power structure could rise all the way to number one. Before that season, national titles were almost exclusively won by blue bloods from major conferences with massive budgets, recruiting bases, and national TV exposure. BYU breaking through as an independent from the WAC forced fans, analysts, and pollsters to rethink what was possible. Their undefeated season, capped by the beating Michigan, showed that elite quarterback play, disciplined coaching, and a modern passing offense can overcome the old assumptions about geography, conference affiliation, and recruiting pipelines. The championship also reshaped how BYU viewed BYU itself. Instead of being seen as a high-scoring outsider, BYU became a legitimate national brand, a program capable of producing Heisman contenders, NFL quarterbacks, and championship-caliber teams. Their title pushed conversations about playoff access, poll bias, and whether non-power programs deserved a real path to the top. In many ways, BYU's run foreshadowed later debates about Boise State, TCU, UCF, and the expanded playoff era. BYU didn't just win a championship, they changed the sport's understanding of who could win one.